And so we are going to be talking about Fatima in relation to world events, Fatima in relation to the direction that the nations are in, the direction our nations are in. The fact that Our Lady did say that if her requests were not granted, Russia would spread her errors throughout the world, provoking wars, famines, and persecution of the church. The good will be martyred. The Holy Father will have much to suffer. Various nations will be annihilated. This will, sometimes when we give talks, people say, well, I thought I was coming for a religious talk and you were talking politics. With the Fatima message, it all works together. It's not that, Our Lady and our Lord Jesus Christ are King of the nations. They're not just King of the churches. They're King of the nations. And the nations actually have a duty. I know this is rather politically incorrect, but the nations do have a duty to recognize Christ as King. And let's face it, if any of us don't believe that, we're so awash in secularism. If any of us don't believe that, then in a way, we can never say the Our Father again. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Not in the churches only as it is in heaven, on earth as it is in heaven. So Our Lady of Fatima came to remind us of this truth and the bedrock truths of the Catholic faith. Before we get started, just a couple housekeeping things. For those of you who may or may not know, the restrooms are out this door and just down, I guess we could say up the corridor a little bit. There is a free statue draw at the literature table, so please, we'll be giving that statue away at the end of at the rally. There is a question and answer session. I should tell you how the day is going to go. I think it's on your brochure anyway. But of course, the rosary was at 12:30. And then I'm John Veneri, editor of Catholic Family News, and I will be speaking for about an hour or so. Then we'll have a break, and then Father Gruner will give his talk. That's always followed by the enrollment of in the brown scapular for those who wish to be enrolled. And then there's the question and answer sessions, and we do ask you to write down your questions and give them to us, and then we'll deal with them as we proceed. Writing them down helps us to keep order, and it keeps members of the audience from giving their own speeches, which does happen, believe me. So, on July 15th, 1946, Catholic historian William Thomas Walsh conducted his famous interview with Sister Lucy. And it was in this interview where he asked Sister Lucy about the consequences of Catholics and church leaders not fulfilling the requests of Our Lady of Fatima, particularly the request for the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary done by the Pope in union with all the bishops, which is, by the way, as you all know, I think has yet to be fulfilled. So here we are, July 15th, 1946. William Thomas Walsh asked Sister Lucy, in your opinion, will every country without exception be overcome by communism? She answered, yes. Mr. Walsh added, and does that mean the United States of America too? And Sister Lucy said, yes. At the same time, July 16th, 1946, there was an American communist named Frank Marshall Davis who was editing a communist newspaper in Chicago called The Star. He was a full-fledged member of the Communist Party. His Communist Party number was CP5, his Communist Party number, his card number was 47544, that's according to declassified FBI files. He was a black man who had a seething hatred of the United States, especially its racism, not without cause. When he was about 8 years old, living down south, he was brutally attacked by a group of teenage boys, almost killed. It was some man came along, they were literally, I think, strangling him. Okay, not without cause. He hated the United States and its racism. He constantly stumped for communist candidates. In his editorials in the Chicago Star at the time, he wrote, "I salute the Soviet Union. I admire Russia. I honor the Red Nation." He consistently pushed for communist victory in Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Turkey, Greece, anywhere communism was trying to get a foothold. His openly communist newspaper had direct connections to Stalin's Kremlin. He mobilized hundreds of progressive Protestant clergymen to rally what would be communist goals, but always under the banner of peace and social justice. The so-called social justice Protestants prior to 1960 were always suckers for communism, particularly in the West. We're going to see that spilled into the Catholic Church after the Council. He denounced the Roman Catholic hierarchy for launching a holy war against communism. I mean, the list of Frank Marshall Davis communist activities go on and on. And in the early 1970s, the same unrepentant communist Frank Marshall Davis, who had since then moved to Hawaii, would come to be a major formative influence on a 10-year-old virtually fatherless boy named Barack Obama. The communist Frank Marshall Davis would be a father figure and mentor to young Barack Obama in that crucial age of formation from ages 10 to 18 and beyond. Now, as Pope St. Pius X warns, the student is formed according to the pattern of the master. Now, it would be troubling enough if Frank Marshall Davis was the only communist who was a large part of Barack Obama's formation, but every major influence on Obama's life was either communist, radical, anti-colonial socialist, including his parents and grandparents. Again, as St. Pius X warned, the student is formed according to the pattern of the master. So we're going to take a look at how this happened, how the United States from 1946 and the United States of today is unrecognizable from the United States of 1946, where it seems that Sister Lucy's prophecy is coming to pass. Even though, of course, nobody would claim, see, when people think of communism, they automatically think of the Stalinist communism, the checkpoints in the streets, the military in the streets, the barbed wire, the tanks, all this business. That's really a Stalinist-Leninist communism. What the United States has fallen into is more of a Gramscian communism, which we'll explain as we proceed. Now, the same anti-colonial radical, Barack Obama, was also formed in the principles of the radical Saul Alinsky. I spent 4 months reading about Alinsky. He's a fascinating figure. So Alinsky dedicated his rules for radicals to the devil, and it was Saul Alinsky who wrote in his 1946 Reveille for Radicals. He said that when the radicals become stronger than their opposition, they must crush their opposition. There's no tolerance. You crush the opposition. And I think this is what we see at work with Obama's contraception mandate against the Catholic Church and the IRS targeting conservative groups and other grisly activities that we'll talk about as we proceed. Now, I said we're going to discuss how all this happened. And since we are speaking of revolutionary activities, we're going to start with the major revolution in the Catholic Church of the 20th century. You all know what that is, the Second Vatican Council. And part of this council's revolution was the new attitude toward communism that failed to condemn the most brutal, organized global system of atheism in world history. Because remember, too, communism is not so much atheism, which it is anti-theism. It is out to destroy the idea of God. So, first, a bit of background regarding the Church's opposition to communism. March 16, 1937, Pope Pius XI issued a powerful encyclical against communism called Divini Redemptoris. Everything in that document conforms to the ordinary and universal magisterium of all times. And in one sentence, Pius XI gave the doctrine and the directive. He said, communism is intrinsically evil, and no one who would save Christian civilization may collaborate with it in any undertaking whatsoever. Pius also warned that communism aims at upsetting the social order and undermining the very foundations of Christian civilization. And Pius further explained, in the face of such a threat, the Catholic Church could not, and does not remain silent. 25 years later, Pope John the 23rd and his Second Vatican Council set the Church on a new direction, wherein silence regarding communism is the new norm, and we're going to, for a couple of minutes, focus on the Council's treatment of communism. It's necessary to first mention modern ecumenism, because the Council's tragic compromise on communism initially sprung from an ecumenical motivation. Pope John the 23rd, whom the progressives believed would favor their cause, was enamored with the modern ecumenical movement, which is of Protestant origins. It's the initiative of various Protestant denominations to no longer fight with one another, but to establish some type of workable unity, come to some sort of union. Very interesting, a very good Thomistic theologian named Father Edward Hanaho. He noted in the 1960s, he said, on the one hand, the ecumenical movement among Protestants is a kind of a good thing, because it has a positive element, because the Protestants actually recognize that they do not have a source of unity within their own congregations, and they have to go out looking for it. But on the other hand, a religious unity that comprises the Catholic Church with Protestant denominations, as I think everyone here knows, has always been forbidden to Catholics. The Church does not seek unity, it possesses it within itself, and it invites non-Catholics to leave their false religion and transfer to the Catholic Church. Conversion means a transfer. Now, the new ecumenism, which was a constitutive element of Vatican II, seeks convergence of Catholics with various Protestant groups rather than conversion. Okay, convergence has replaced conversion. Pope Pius XI condemned this false sense of Christian unity in Mortalium Animus, a magnificent 1926 encyclical that represents 2,000 years of the consistent teaching of the Church on this topic. The Pope insisted that there is only one way to Christian unity, and that is a return of non-Catholics to the one true Church. Catholic participation, one of the reasons it had always been condemned, because it sends the message to non-Catholics telling them, I'm talking about religious camaraderie, I'm not talking about just basic discussion, which is what we should be doing, about talking to people about the faith in order to explain it to them and hopefully convert them to Catholicism. But basically, the new ecumenism sends the message to the non-Catholics, telling them that they are attached to a legitimate creed and need not convert to the Church for salvation. As early as 1959, again, the same theologian, Father Thomas Hanaho, he warned that modern ecumenism, and I'm quoting, has the effect of perpetuating the state of separation, serving rather to keep people out of the Church rather than bring them into it. Yet in the 1950s, ecumenism was the rage, the fashion du jour, and too many Catholic priests, theologians, and even prelates were straining at the leash in order to take part. So in the spirit of ecumenical relations with Protestants and non-Catholics, Pope John the 23rd determined that Protestants be present at Vatican II. They were not to be part of the Council's formal proceedings, they were just to be observers, but I think, as most of you know, they did influence a strong informal influence that was actually detrimental to the Church. Pope John the 23rd also wanted at the Council delegates from what is called the Russian Orthodox Church. Now keep in mind, as I mentioned already, the Catholic Church has always been the foremost enemy of communism, not only in the 20th century, it goes back to the middle of the 19th century. These papal warnings stretch back to the middle of 1847. Pius IX condemned communism in his encyclical Qui Pluribus, where he called it a doctrine most opposed to the very natural law. The same Pius condemned socialism and communism in his encyclical Nostis et Nobiscum, 1849. Look how far back that goes. And in the Syllabus of Errors and in Quanta Cura, 1864. Pope Leo XIII likewise condemned communism in 1878. He called it the fatal plague which insinuates itself into the very marrow of human society, only to bring about its ruin. So after the Russian Revolution, of course, the popes increased their thunder. Pope Pius XI condemned communism 7 times, including his landmark encyclical. And Pius XII continued this opposition until his death in 1958. As you know, communism is founded on atheism. It adheres to the fable that there is no God and that the universe is self-existent. It just made itself, or it's just there, as some so-called scientists say. It's just a brute fact. Don't even try to figure out where it came from. There's a physicist who basically says that with a straight face. It basically holds the doctrine of communism that there is nothing but matter, nothing but the material world. It holds thus a false understanding of human nature that regards man as strictly material, a highly developed ape. You are just a handsome pile of atoms. You are just a pretty pile of atoms that are just working together for a while and then you fall apart again. And so, but your dog is a nice pile of atoms, as is a frog, as is your petunias. So there's really no difference between the animal world and the plant world and man. Okay? And human beings are just the latest, first of all, and of course man, being strictly material, has no immortal soul. Human beings are just the latest stage in the so-called evolutionary process. A human being has no intrinsic worth beyond its usefulness to the state. Communism, of course, wishes to form an empire of godlessness, wherein the state, and only the state, is the highest authority. And since there is no God, then the state answers to no higher power than itself. It can do whatever it pleases. Who does it answer to if there is no God? It answers to no one. It responds to no one. It's not responsible to anyone. It can trample the legitimate rights of its people, including the mass murder of its own citizens. Trampling on the rights of its people, as I said, Joe Stalin deliberately starved 11 million Ukrainians alone. This is why while Frank Marshall Davis was in Chicago waving the flag of how wonderful Joe Stalin is. Remember Dostoevsky's famous quote, "If God does not exist, then anything is permissible." And Alexander Solzhenitsyn said it is godlessness that leads to the gulag. This is why we do have to be concerned of the rising tide of godlessness in the United States and in social institutions and in government. Anyway, the entire communist system is based on evolution and materialism. It has consistently attacked the church by persecution, by calculated subversion. It works to eradicate Catholicism, not necessarily by destroying the church outright, but by draining it of its supernatural content and by nullifying its resistance to communism, and if possible, to use the structure of the church to further its own designs. Now, Vatican II, as I said, was the event that caused communism to the church's opposition to communism to be effectively quashed. Pope John XXIII took an overly optimistic view in dealing with the Soviets, an unrealistic approach with disastrous consequences. We're not getting into John XXIII's motivations. He might have had good motivations. He might have been acting the way he really thought it should be, but it's had disastrous consequences. John XXIII pursued his goal for 2 Russian Orthodox clerics from the USSR to attend the Second Vatican Council as observers. Khrushchev agreed to send observers, but there was a condition, that the council must not issue any condemnation of communism and of the communist state. And in a gesture that defies common sense and also defies his predecessors, John XXIII agreed. After more than a century of papal condemnation, John XXIII's Vatican-Moscow Agreement constituted the first serious breach in the Catholic bulwark against communism. Now, here is one of the dramas that took place at the Second Vatican Council where we see the Vatican-Moscow Agreement playing itself out. In October 1964, the council was debating what would be called the document Gaudium et Spes, the pastoral constitution for the church in the modern world. Chapter 13 of that text dealt with atheism. It contained no mention of communism. Okay? You're talking about atheism. You're talking about the modern world. You have this atheistic system in the modern world, the most brutal probably in history, and the council's not mentioning it. So Vatican II, the so-called Council of Unity, was actually a council of sharp division. On the one side, there were progressivists, theologians, bishops who wanted to make revolutionary changes in liturgy, in church discipline, and in the way doctrine is presented. These were the liberals or the neo-modernists. This liberal group, due to some pretty sharp maneuvering, a story too lengthy to cover here, but I bet you everybody knows the story. It's so well known by now, and it's documented by both sides of the conflict. The liberals and the conservatives document this. The liberals gained control of the council from the very first days of its opening and maintained that control to the end. These liberal churchmen, effectively violating their oath against modernism, set the church on a new path by means of the council's aggiornamento, update. As Cardinal Sunens boasted, he was a liberal cardinal, he was proud of it. He said Vatican II is the French Revolution of the church. Now on the conservative side were bishops such as Archbishop Segal, Italy's Bishop Carli, France's Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, Brazil's Bishop Antonio de Castro, and other great traditional fathers who fought this modernist coup d'etat. The pitched battles that took place at the council, again, they're a matter of record. I'm not going to cover them here. But these conservative fathers came to be the International Group of Fathers, that's what they were called, and they recognized immediately that the draft of the council document Gaudium et Spes not only failed to condemn communism, but failed to mention it at all. And as I said, the irony is glaring. Gaudium et Spes was supposed to be dealing with the issues of the modern world, yet it ignored the most brutal system of evil in the modern world. So the International Group of Fathers marshaled their enemies. To make a long story short, they had a number of petitions, but they delivered 450 petitions to the council's secretary who was charged with this. They delivered it within the proper time limit. Archbishop Lefebvre himself delivered the 450 signatures. Yet when the new draft of Gaudium et Spes came out the next week, whenever it was, there was no mention of this petition to condemn communism. And they said, when they questioned what was going on, they learned the excuse they got is that the petition was conveniently lost in a drawer of the secretary. The secretary was never disciplined for this. In fact, he was promoted. He was made an apostolic delegate to Cairo. So, the reason, of course, communism was not condemned is obvious. It was due to the Vatican-Moscow Agreement. And the end result is that Gaudium et Spes only speaks in general about modern atheisms, and it only footnotes Pius XI's 1937 encyclical against communism, and tellingly enough, the footnote only refers to the encyclical by its Latin title, Divini Redemptoris. The English title is On Atheistic Communism, but it assured that the word communism appears nowhere in Vatican II documents. Archbishop Lefebvre would rightly say, quote, "The refusal of this pastoral council to issue any official condemnation of communism alone suffices to disgrace it for all times. When one thinks of the tens of millions of martyrs, of people having their personalities scientifically destroyed in psychiatric hospitals, serving as human guinea pigs for all sorts of experiments." Now this close quote, now this is just one example of what Father Fatima archivist Joachim Alonso referred to as, I'm quoting him now, the crisis of faith within the church, the negligence of the pastors themselves, the internal struggle in the very bosom of the church, and of grave pastoral negligence of the upper hierarchy. Close quote. So passing over the battles, the shenanigans, the intrigues of Vatican II, we come to Paul VI's closing speech of the council. And it was this speech that set the stage for the entire post-Vatican II period, the lethal consequences of which are with us to this hour. December 7th, 1965, at the close of Vatican II, Pope Paul VI, a man of the progressive camp, he was clearly on the side of the progressives, he delivered a farewell address to the bishops departing the council to return to their homes. It was this speech that provided the broad philosophic and quasi-theological umbrella beneath which secularism within the Roman Catholic Church would flourish. Whether or not, again, it was Paul VI's intentions, we're not getting into a person's intentions, this secularization of the church was the result. Paul VI told the departing bishops that the church was decidedly to opt for man, to serve man, to help man build his home on earth, man with his ideas, man with his aims, with his hopes, his fears, man in his difficulties. This is to be the centerpiece of the church's interests. Now, granted, Paul VI also spoke of God and the things that pertain to God, but the overall tenor of his speech, as was the spirit of Vatican II, was towards a man-centeredness. This new spirit transformed the face of the Catholic Church radically and rapidly. Those of us who lived through the 1960s, we remember the clergy becoming involvement, activism. They cast themselves into the world of man, the plight of the poor. Nothing wrong with dealing with the poor, but what we had is we had an overemphasis of the natural to the neglect of the supernatural. Contemplative religious orders, those dear nuns who spend all their days praying and sacrificing, they were ridiculed as outdated. Their work a waste of time. Prayer was discarded for social work. Holy hours before the Blessed Sacrament were replaced by holy hours in the soup kitchen, or helping the inner city poor, or protesting the Vietnam War. Bishop Sheen talked about this in the 1970s, this overemphasis on activism to the neglect of the spiritual. You need a balance of both, with a strong spiritual life supporting you. But the battle, though, this new approach, the battle was no longer the age-old battle between Christ and Lucifer, between the kingdom of God and the kingdom of Satan, but between the rich and the poor, the privileged against the dispossessed, the exploiters against the exploited, the fat cats against the downtrodden. And this preoccupation with social issues, taken up now in human terms, resulted, we all remember it, the clergy abandoning their clerical garb in order to be one with the world, adopting lay dress. The more radical element among the clergy and religious went on to form alliances with socialists and communists and even armed revolutionaries. And since churchmen no longer condemned communism due to the Vatican-Moscow Agreement, then what is to stop Catholics from aligning themselves with Marxists and socialists when the brotherhood of man is at stake? So it was this new spirit that gave birth to liberation theology in South America, and spawned what could be called the social justice Catholic, the liberal Democrat Catholic in North America. And these liberal groups grew in strength and numbers in direct proportion to the lack of disciplinary action from the bishops. The council's new attitude of dialogue with error emboldened modern theologians to openly defy bedrock truths of the Catholic faith. The 1968 revolt against Humanae Vitae, when Paul VI reiterated the Church's consistent condemnation of contraception. This is an example, and it's the direct consequence of the spirit of the council and its lust for change. And what's the worst part about it is the U.S. bishops in 1968, they issued a pastoral letter supposedly in support of Humanae Vitae, but they had a little section called Norms for Licit Dissent. It's in there, Norms for Licit Dissent. So it's basically saying, here's what we're teaching, and if you don't like what we're teaching, you don't want to accept it, well then here's your norms to follow. It's beyond madness. So these new norms for licit dissent, though, what did they do? They guaranteed that modernist professors would remain at their posts, spewing their talks into Catholic young adults by the tens of thousands. You gave me norms for licit dissent. You can't fire me, Bishop, from my university post. So Vatican-appointed modernist bishops descended on the church like a plague of locusts. Bad Catholic leadership led to increased subversion of doctrine, morals, and discipline. School courses often were not so much heretical, I think you've all gone through this, maybe not so much heretical as they are insipid. They don't really say anything. That's the type of thing that I got in Catholic high school. What does love mean to you? What does neighbor mean to you? What does fellowship mean to you? And then we end the religion class by holding hands and singing, "Let there be peace on earth and let it be." I was up to my eyeballs in that in Catholic high school. That's what told me there was something wrong, because I wanted doctrine and I was getting the felt banner religion. So anyway, the bishops introduced perverse sex education courses in Catholic schools in defiance of common sense and in defiance of Pope Pius XI's 1929 prohibition of classroom sex education. The parents, the Catholic parents who objected, were belittled, ignored, told to get lost by the local diocese. So by the 1980s, I'm sure I'm talking to people who lived through this, who fought this battle. Catholic parents by the thousands would remove their children from Catholic school and at great personal sacrifice would teach them at home because they could not trust the curriculum that their own bishops were giving them. Catholic homeschooling grows and prospers for the same reason to this day. Due to the Council's aggiornamento, institutes of Catholic higher learning effectively renounced their Catholic heritage in the name of a false idea of academic freedom. And academic freedom says, I'm in a Catholic institutions, but I could say the Ten Commandments don't exist. All right? They became hotbeds of heresy, corrupters of morals, purveyors of left-wing political indoctrination. Students were taught to sneer at almost everything the church held dear, and if the professor did not succeed in making the student sneer, he would at least succeed in making him doubt, undermine. We don't know any of this is true. This is certain. Nancy Pelosi and Kathleen Sebelius are two pro-abortion, pro-homosexual politicians. They are the fruit of modern Catholic academia. We know what they are. They're not Catholic. Many Catholic colleges are now springboards of advocacy of so-called same-sex marriage, support for homosexual adoption, homosexuals to serve openly in the military. In her book, I don't know if you've read it, Status Envy, by Dr. Ann Hendershot, she wrote, it's about the collapse of Catholic higher education in the United States. Very well done. Cara Sofrondini, a graduate, she says, Cara Sofrondini, a graduate at Jesuit Boston College Law School, and now the legislative attorney for the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, which advocates same-sex marriage and strives to build political power for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community, told an alumni gathering of the Lambda Law students that, quote, I want to begin by saying that everything I know about queer activism I learned at Boston College Law School. It's supposed to be a Jesuit institution. This is what I mean. People call Catholics hypocrites. I'll tell you, people want Catholics to be hypocrites. People want Catholics to pretend that the teachings in Scripture against homosexuality do not exist, against divorce do not exist, the church teaching of against contraception does not exist. They want you to pretend that none of that exists and to call yourself Catholic. They want us to be hypocrites. We can't be. We have to be true to what divine and natural law teaches. In the civic order, one of the most important elements of the common good is a well-informed public opinion. The church must be the guardian and teacher of natural and divine law, proclaim these truths to the multitude, and combat error against natural and divine law. When churchmen themselves, though, become the slaves of modern trends, as again, even Bishop Sheen complained in 1976, Catholics are no longer informed but deformed concerning the very rudiments of their faith. A well-informed public opinion is a thing of the past, leaving the majority free-floating, anchorless, and defenseless. They are ever increasing susceptible to the latest liberal cause du jour, to poisonous materialistic education, to nonstop public relations campaign from the godless, those godless people who are in the media, the godless politicians, and the special interest groups. And as evidence, we need look no further than to the twice elected Barack Obama. Barack Obama is a creature of the new paganism, a man educated beyond his intelligence, a product of skilled media handlers, a man of no moral worth. I wish I could like him. He was the right package for the right time, presented to the world as a messianic figure who would bestow peace, unify the nation, rise above partisanship, remember that one? Walk on water, save the planet. You think I'm exaggerating? Newsweek writer Evan Thomas, here's what he said after one of Obama's speeches. He said, in a way, Obama is standing above the country, above the world. He's sort of God. He didn't get fired for saying that. Right? Now, the promise was a lie, and Barack knew it was a lie, all the while reveling in coast-to-coast adulation, inexperienced, narcissist, amoral. Obama's not so much immoral as he is amoral. He was the most pro-abortion, pro-homosexual, pro-socialist president candidate in the nation's history. Yet, I could deal with Obama if that's his beliefs, okay? I can deal with that. But one of the strongest voting bases in 2008 was American Catholics. He gathered 54% of the Catholic vote. In 2012, after he voiced his support for same-sex marriage, and in the throes of Obama's attack on the church via the contraception mandate, he again won the presidency with 50% of Catholics casting their ballot for Barack. The gullibility, ignorance, and deformation of modern Catholics is the direct result of the worldwide collapse of faith caused by Vatican II and its decision to take the church onto this new course, to opt for man, to help him build his home on earth, to neglect the supernatural and emphasize the natural. Father Henri de Lubac, the great theologian, so-called, he rejoiced that in the document Dei Verbum, the word supernatural does not appear. He was happy about that, the Vatican II document. Yet in this new turning towards man, our churchmen, perhaps unknowingly, had hearkened to the ghost of a savvy communist intellectual who died in an Italian prison 25 years before Vatican II opened its doors. During the height of Stalin's tyranny in the Soviet Union, there was an Italian communist named Antonio Gramsci, and he was drafting a different kind of communism more suited to the Western world. Gramsci was born in 1891, died in 1937, spending the last 9 years of his life in prison under Mussolini. Now, Gramsci, certainly he was a dedicated Marxist, but he opposed forcing communism at the barrel of the gun. Lenin's brutality, Stalin's brutality, the Soviet Union, the satellite countries, he considered that cloddish, needless, and guaranteed to spark the antagonism of the West. So Gramsci knew that there was a better way. So why did he know this? It was because he was born into the Catholic Italy of the 19th century. And Gramsci was well aware, he could feel it, he could taste it, it was all around him, the strong Catholic culture of 19th century Italy, early 20th century, the Catholic culture that pervaded everything. And he understood the power that culture has to form the individual, and he understood that to change the thinking of man, it is necessary to change the culture in which he lives. So thus, a central component in Gramsci's plan was to secularize man to the point of godlessness, replace Christian civilization with one of this world, stress humanity, human dignity, human rights, human solidarity, national consensus, and you denounce or you undermine anything that stands in the way of complete human freedom, including Christianity. You shift the population from a Christian mindset either to a non-Christian mindset, or better still, an anti-Christian mindset. You work toward a complete secularization of Western nations. Accomplish this, and a prime goal of communism is realized. You don't have to have people believing that there is no God. You just need a nation of people who act as if there's no God, that God has no influence in their lives. A complete secularized society that takes no account of Jesus Christ in its laws, its social commerce, its mode of behavior. Now, Gramsci has been called the ghost who haunts the East and West. Malachi Martin called him that. The ghost who haunts the East and West. Mikhail Gorbachev was the first Soviet leader to fully incorporate Gramsci's principles, which resulted in the glasnost and perestroika of 1989. And Gramsci's spirit lives and thrives in the United States. Christianity still has a presence, yes it does, but secularism is really the main engine of social institutions, education, medicine, finance, entertainment, pop culture, as well as civic and political thinking. We live in a climate of godlessness. Too many Americans would more welcome a dead mouse floating in his beer than the laws of Christ to advance in society and in civil affairs. As for the Church, of course, Vatican II is a Gramscian dream come true. As one author observed about Paul VI's closing speech of the Council, where he's opting for man, he said, Gramsci himself could not have written a better script for the secularization of the Roman Catholic institutions. And the forces of secularism unleashed as a result are working full speed up to this moment. There's a recently released documentary called Grinding America Down. Has anyone seen it? Grinding America Down. It's by former Idaho representative. His name is Curtis Brown. And in the beginning of this documentary, Mr. Brown tells the story of when he was a graduate student in 1992, and a writer acquaintance asked Brown, he wanted him to attend this weekend meeting of the Communist Party USA. The meeting was held in Berkeley, California. He said he thought he was going to see a bunch of young hippies in sandals and long hair and things like that. When he got there, it was older, serious-looking academics with their briefcases. This was a serious meeting that he was part of. And he said there he saw communists propounding a strategy of subversion of America from within. To break down the family, the communists urged promotion of cohabitation, that's living together out of wedlock, and the feminist movement. I'm quoting Brown directly here. To destroy our culture and religion, the communists encouraged promotion of homosexuality. And to destroy business, Brown relates, the communists said they wanted to get behind the environmental movement as they saw it as the only vehicle capable of creating enough regulation and red tape to discourage business growth. Now, Brown said when he saw this plan outlined in 1992, he said, this plan is so radical, I don't have to worry about it in my lifetime. And he kind of dismissed it. But around 2006, he says in the documentary, he remembered this meeting. And he was stunned to realize that every goal that the communists set at that meeting was being fulfilled in the United States. In the same documentary, there's a former White House staff economic advisor, Jim Simpson. He said Patrick Moore was a co-founder of Greenpeace, and he was a very dedicated environmentalist. But he quit Greenpeace when he realized that it had been captured by radical leftists who were intent on using the environmental movement as a vehicle to destroy capitalism, choking things with regulations. So it's no surprise that Barack Obama pushes, as much as he is able, the environmentalist agenda. In fact, Obama's program, and when you just stand back and look at it objectively, it pretty much fulfills that 1992 Communist Plan to the letter. Does this mean that he is definitely a Marxist in his thinking? No, it means that his ideas and the way he was formed coincide with Marxist thinking. Doesn't necessarily mean he's a Marxist. Now, this is not to say, as I said, he's a card-carrying communist. More likely, as Denise D'Souza points out, that Obama is more of an anti-colonial socialist. And we'll treat a little more of that, because most of us aren't familiar with that terminology, a little later. But I want to talk about the fact that Curtis Brown is not, the things that he saw, this is not the first time we're hearing this. There was a 1958 book called The Naked Communist by Leon Skosin. He was a former FBI agent, and he documented 45 communist goals to subvert America from within. Don't worry, I'm not going to read all 45 of them. But the book was called The Naked Communist. I've had this book since 1980. Anyway, here's what Skosin said pointed out in 1958. Goal 24, eliminate all laws governing obscenity by calling them censorship and a violation of free speech. Goal 25, break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, and TV. Goal 16, present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy. Okay, 1958, this was published. We see a similar goal in 1992. Of course, if you tell people this now, they just think you're crazy. You know, you've been watching Glenn Beck or something. I don't watch Glenn Beck. Okay, I'm going by their own things here. Goal 27, infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with social religion. Discredit the Bible. Goal 40, discredit the family as an institution, encourage promiscuity and easy divorce. And also, you just redefine the family. As one said, you know, that the family can now be defined as either a man and a woman in a marriage and children, in a monogamous relationship. It can comprise everything from that to two lesbians and a canary. This is our family. Because man is saying, we define everything. There is no God, there is no natural law. We define what family is, what marriage is, what everything is. Now, a number of these same goals, each of these goals listed by Mr. Skosin, considered unthinkable in 1958, are not only accomplished in the United States, but are the principal components, especially in today's pop culture. Take a look at MTV, Hollywood, rock and roll, countless other mediums. And a number of these, I said, are the same goals of Curtis Simpson. Now, these are all two initiatives dear to Barack Obama. Conservative writer Denise D'Souza, he called Obama, quote, the most anti-business president in a generation, perhaps in American history. I think this was in Forbes magazine. He initially wrote this. He said, thanks to him, the era of big government is back. Obama runs up taxpayer debt not in the billions, but in the trillions. He has expanded the federal government's control over home mortgages, investment banking, health care, autos, and energy. And it's very interesting. Denise D'Souza is a former native of Mumbai, India. He is what you would call a person of color. All right, so you couldn't accuse him of racism, because that's an easy thing. You know, you're just being racist if you criticize Obama. That's a cheap argument. Don't fall for it. Anyway, D'Souza is a former native of Mumbai, India. He grew up within what he called an anti-colonialist environment in India. And D'Souza recognizes in Obama a kind of anti-colonial socialism. Because D'Souza points out that we make the mistake of trying to fit Obama into a strictly American framework, even regarding his left-wing ideas. He reminds us that Obama spent 17 years of his life off mainland America, in Hawaii, Indonesia, and I think Pakistan. His formation is not that of the average American. As I said, all of his formative influences, starting with his own parents, were radical, socialist, anti-Western, revolutionary. We're going to meet some of them. His parents, from what we know, he never took him to a 4th of July parade. His mother hated the United States. His mother hated the American flag. His mother was anti-Western. So what are we talking about regarding anti-colonialism? Well, anti-colonialism is here defined as the doctrine that wealthy country got rich by invading, occupying, and looting the poor countries of Asia, Africa, and South America. And it's high time that we cut down the imperialists and build up the weaker nations. Obama, D'Souza explains, inherited this anti-colonialist attitude from his father, Barack Obama Sr. And in fact, D'Souza points out that Obama pretty much spells all this out in his book, Dreams from My Father. Obama's policies of weakening America and favoring the development of poorer countries are consistent with anti-colonialist attitudes. And this is, the book I would recommend is The Roots of Obama's Rage. Read the arguments for yourself. And I think he makes a very good case. D'Souza also has a follow-up book called Obama's America, and also his documentary 2016. For example, Obama approved massive loans of millions of dollars for offshore drilling, but this was for offshore drilling in Brazil, not in the United States. And D'Souza gives examples of this throughout his book. But you think of it, Obama actually, whether purposely or not, or it's just the result of his thinking, he actually fulfills that 1992 communist meeting. Obama is pro-abortion, the most pro-abortion president in the United States history, which is an attack on family, children, on human nature itself. It shows his thinking in line with the godless humanist manifestos of 1933 and 1974, in which it says that considers contraception and abortion not only as a right, but as a necessary component for the welfare of society. Humanist Manifesto says that. Obama, as already noted, is a promoter of environmentalism, environmental regulations that needlessly cripple industry. We don't want pollution, but the regulations go over the top. We know that. And Obama, as president, is the most bold promoter of the homosexual agenda in history. He worked to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. He is now on a full-scale attack against the Defense of Marriage Act. And just to give you an idea of the thinking, on October 13th, 2009, Obama gave a speech to a homosexualist group called the Human Rights Campaign, where he vowed to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell and the Defense of Marriage Act. Obama went on to say, listen to this, he says, "You will see a time in which we as a nation finally recognize relationships between two men and two women as just as real and admirable as relationships between man and woman." Obama went on to say that he and his wife Michelle had made a point of inviting homosexual families to the White House to participate in events like the Easter egg roll, he said, because we want to send a message. Obama has constantly backed this agenda. And just a few weeks ago, I think you might have seen this in the news, it's astounding, when basketball star Jason Collins announced to the world that he was a homosexual, he immediately got a personal call of congratulations from the President of the United States. Obama said to Jason Collins, "I couldn't be prouder." This is the type of thing he backs. Whatever it is certainly not Christian. You'll notice, too, he telephoned Sandra Fluke, the overage college girl that was testifying that Catholic Georgetown University should include contraceptive coverage in the health care program for the students. He telephoned her to congratulate her. You'll notice in these latest IRS scandals where the conservative groups are targeted and the Tea Party groups are targeted. Of course, Obama says to the press, "I'm outraged." But you'll notice he never calls the Tea Party group. He never calls the the Council on the Family, I forget the name of that. He never calls these conservative groups and says, I'm sorry this happened, and we're working that it doesn't happen again. He just makes a statement, I'm outraged, and they repeat it. Okay, well, he's outraged. Now, we're going to talk about some of the formative influences, okay? In a way, I don't see how Obama could have turned out any way else. He really needs our prayers. He really needs our prayers because his entire formative influences is not Christian, it is not Western, it is really what you would call the leftist formation. Barack Obama Sr. was an anti-colonial socialist, a Lua tribesman who grew up in Kenya and studied at Harvard. He participated in Africa's struggle to be free from European rule. He was a polygamist who over time had 4 wives and 8 children. Though he was mainly an absentee father, Obama's ideology exercised a profound influence over Barack Jr. from early childhood. There's an economist named Nhrr Teeth. He was a fellow student of Obama's father. And he said Barack Sr. was always glorifying about how communism had liberated Africa and Cuba. For him, communism was going to save the world. Another one, Philip O'Keefe, who came to America to study at the same time as Obama Sr., I'm talking about, became good friends and a drinking buddy with him. He said, our generation was totally anti-colonial. And when O'Keefe was asked, are you still an anti-colonialist? He said, yes, I am, as was Barack Obama Sr. So in July 1965, this gives you some idea of the thinking, Barack Sr. published an article in the East African Journal called Problems Facing Our Socialism. And one of the questions he deals with is, what does a country do when you have a powerful concentration of economic wealth at the top? Here's what he said. Number one, 2 things. Number one, you use the power of the state to control and regulate private industry. And number 2, you establish a very high tax. How high? Here's what he wrote. This is actually archived on the Politico webpage. Obama wrote, theoretically, Obama Sr., there is nothing wrong that can stop the government from taxing 100% of income, so long as the people get benefits from the government commensurate with their income, which is taxed. Okay? It's a quote. So this is to advocate complete state centralization, heavy state central planning, which is nothing else but state absolutism, a kind of totalitarianism that assumes total control. I work, I turn all my money over to the government, and then they give it back to me based on what I should get. Obama's own grandmother said that Obama Jr., the man now in the White House, is following the ideological footsteps of his socialist father. She said, quote, he has taken everything from his father. The son is realized everything the father wanted. The dreams from the father are alive in the son. And that's the point that Dinesh D'Souza makes. Obama's book is not called Dreams of My Father, but Dreams from My Father. We're starting to wind this up. Some of the other formative influences, including with Obama's mother. Stanley Ann Durham, Barack Jr.'s mother, was Barack Sr.'s most fervent admirer. She was a bohemian, a leftist from her earliest years. She's been called a 60s girl before there was the 60s. She rebelled against her parents, against Christianity, against her country. One of her high school teachers says that she was an aficionado of foreign films, jazz, and Karl Marx. All right. Now, when it came time to marry, she preferred a non-white foreigner, ideally anti-Western and anti-American. And she found her dream in Barack Obama Sr., whom she met in Russian class. Though that they were the same political ideology, but they split up even before young Barack was born. But nonetheless, the mother praised Obama Sr. to the sky as principled man, as uncompromising. She defended his absence, saying that he's on a grand crusade, fighting to liberate his people. While young Barack was regaling in these stories, his father was actually very sad. He was a severe alcoholic. He was a philanderer. Anne's second husband, Lolo Sotero, he too was anti-Western. He was a student from Indonesia. But Anne eventually became disillusioned with him because he started to get more and more involved with American business practices. Anyway, In order to keep Barack Jr. from Lolo's influence, she sent Barack Jr. away to be raised by his grandparents in Hawaii. She never returned to her son. She pursued her life in Indonesia, along with a highly immoral, swinging lifestyle. And in 1995, when she lay dying of cancer, Barack Jr. did not visit her, did not attend her death, did not attend her funeral. He's a scarred man. As for Barack Sr., he went from bad to worse. He died in a drunken car wreck. Barack continued to idolize his father until, I think it was his half-sister, who finally sat him down and told him what his father really was. The drunkenness, the multiple wives, the failures. But this left-wing influence on Obama didn't stop with the parents. As I mentioned, when Barack was 10, he was sent to stay with the grandparents, and the grandfather introduced him to the Marxist drinking buddy, the one I quoted in the beginning of this talk, Frank Marshall Davis. And the grandfather saw in Davis a mentor and a role model for young Barack, and a close rapport grew between Davis and Obama for more than 8 years. Now, Davis by now had left mainland United States. He considered it too racist, and he went to work for a newspaper in Hawaii, a labor newspaper with communist ties. He went on to write a pornographic novel based on his own philandering, including the statutory rape of a 13-year-old. The future President Barack Obama wrote in Dreams of My Father that he and his grandfather would sometimes assist Frank in composing dirty limericks. Okay? This is the teen formation he had. In Dreams of My Father, Barack Obama mentions Frank 22 times, only Frank, but he doesn't mention his full name. I think if he knew he was going to be president, he wouldn't have mentioned him at all. I understand in the audio version of the book, Frank is scrubbed out. I haven't checked that for myself. I saw a report about it. But anyway, they would hang up for hours, the grandfather, Marshall Davis, and young Barack would absorb these left-wing ideologies from the two old men. So how radical was this? Well, Cold War historian Paul Kenger, he says Frank Marshall Davis was considered such a threat by the FBI that they actually placed him on the federal government security index. And what that means is he was considered such a potential threat that if war ever broke out between the United States and the Soviet Union, Frank Marshall Davis would be placed under immediate arrest. And so when Paul Kenger asked why the mainstream media has ignored this, he says, well, they have to. Have we ever had a president of the United States, I'm quoting him, who was mentored to some meaningful degree by a literally pro-Soviet, pro-communist, card-carrying member of the Communist Party, card number 47544. That alone, the pro-Obama media has to ignore, and they have, and they'll call me Joe McCarthy for bothering to look at it. We all know that. You just get called names. Some other influences. We're going to cover these quickly and close. Professor Robert Mangara Unger. He taught Obama at Harvard Law School. He was a socialist so radical that he was rejected by the foreign socialist government that he served in. He was in Brazil, and he was rejected by them. He had gone to Brazil about 10 years ago or something and came back and returned to Harvard. But interestingly enough, this is very interesting to me. During Obama's 2008 presidential campaign, Unger skipped town and he declined all interviews because he knew his association with Obama would hurt Obama's bid for president. And he later, after Obama was elected, he said, I am a leftist, Unger said. I am a leftist, and by conviction as well as temperament, a revolutionary. Any association of mine with Barack Obama in the course of the campaign could only do harm, close quote. So think about this. A man who calls himself a leftist, a man who calls himself a revolutionary, wanted Barack Obama to be elected. And he made sure not to do anything that would damage Obama's chances. I'm not going to go into details about Jeremiah Wright, Bill Ayers. We know who they are. But we also know, as Pope St. Pius X said, it's inescapable. The student is formed according to the pattern of the master. You are formed according to the principles and the ideas that you grow up with. And of course, Obama was a student of the ruthless tactics of Saul Alinsky. This is the last one we'll talk about. The left-wing agitator whose landmark book, Rules for Radicals, Alinsky dedicated it to the devil. Mike Kruglich, who was Obama's Chicago instructor on Alinsky methods, he said Obama was the best student of Alinsky tactics that he ever had. David Alinsky's, and he's just not whistling Dixie here, David Alinsky, Saul Alinsky's son, he applauded Obama for successfully implementing Alinsky's methods. Immediately after his acceptance speech at the 2008 Democratic National Convention, David Alinsky wrote a letter to the Boston Globe in full praise of Obama as one who has learned my father's methods well, he said. And even Obama zealot Chris Matthews, in December 2010 broadcast of Hardball, he referred to Obama as the guy who comes from Saul Alinsky. Now, a lot of people, when they get the book Rules for Radicals, I've read it twice, they go straight to the chapter on the Rules for Radicals, and they think that's what Alinsky's all about. No, you want to know Alinsky, you read the first chapter, where he lays out the principles on which he works. The first chapter, and Alinsky basically operates on three foundational principles. Number one, Alinsky says, there is no such thing as dogma. All truth is relative. For the organizer, he says, I'm quoting now, everything is relative and changing. The organizer does not have any fixed truth. And he says this places the organizer in a superior position because, quote, he is free from the shackles of dogma. So in other words, Alinsky starts his book by saying there is no such thing as dogma, and I am telling you that dogmatically. See the contradiction. Second, right out of Alinsky's opening chapter, there is no such thing as a rule for ethics. For Alinsky, the end justifies the means. All ethics are elastic to stretch with the time, or the situation you're in, or the strategy you need to employ. Alinsky taught, I'm quoting now, page 32, ethical standards must be elastic to stretch with the times. It's pure utilitarianism. So if you need to lie, you lie. If you need to make promises you know you won't keep, you do it. You do it anyway. And the third principle of Alinsky, on page 25, corruption in the leader is a kind of virtue. Forgive me, he gets a little blasphemous here. I'm quoting him directly. He said, to say that a corrupt means corrupts the ends is to believe in the immaculate conception of ends and principles. The real arena is corrupt and bloody. Life is a corrupting process. He who fears corruption fears life. And then Alinsky goes on to castigate the leader who places his own personal convictions and his own personal salvation above the needs of the people. He claims that the leader, quote, does not care enough about the people to be corrupted for them. Now, this is close quote. Now, this is the school in which Barack Obama was formed, okay? No dogma, no objective truth, no fixed standards of ethics, the end justifies the means, and corruption in the leader is raised to the level of virtue. So how can anyone believe anything that Obama says, and not just Obama, any student of Alinsky? If Monsignor Egan of Chicago said he was a student of Alinsky, I would never believe anything he said again. Hillary Clinton is a student of Alinsky. Barack Obama is a student of Alinsky. I can't believe people who operate on these principles. Now, as a student of Alinsky, Obama will think nothing of stamping out those who are in the way of his party's agenda. As I said earlier, in his 1946 book, Reveille for Radicals, he said that if the radicals come to be stronger than the opposition, they must crush the opposition. And I believe this is what we see going on with the targeting, the IRS targeting of conservative groups under the Obama administration. And we also see the principle of crush the opposition in Obama's attack on the Catholic Church through the contraception mandate. This is an attack. There's no way around it. is the part of Obamacare wherein Catholic institutions are forced to provide contraception and sterilization and health insurance programs, and if the Catholic institutions refuse to do this, they will face ruinous fines or will be forced out of existence. Congressman Chris Smith and Tulsa's Bishop Edward Sladley, they see this crush the opposition principle here. Smith said that Obama's pro-abortion directives are designed so that, quote, religious hospitals will be squeezed out, and Bishop Slattery said that the new mandate may end up, quote, closing down every Catholic school, hospital, and other public ministry of the church, which is perhaps the intention, the original intention. Now, very quickly, we're coming to a close. I just want to give a quick, what's the problem with socialism anyway? Relying on Dr. Waters, the great Thomistic philosopher, he sums it up in the natural order with three problems. First, that the function of the government is to govern and not to replace its citizens. We do our work, the government does its work. They don't replace the citizens. Secondly, it's the principle of subsidiarity. What can be done by the lower should not be done by the higher. Washington, D.C. should not be organizing trash collection in Bridgeport, Connecticut. That's an extreme example, but you get the idea. And third, every step towards dependence is a step away from independence. One of the many problems, these are just three of the many problems of socialism. So, Sister Lucy was correct. Today's United States is unrecognizable from what it was in 1946, when she told William Thomas Walsh that even the United States would be overcome by communism. And remember the distinction I made earlier, is I'm not talking about the Stalinist, Leninist, barbed wire, checkpoints, tanks in the streets, with all direction coming from Moscow. No, I'm talking about this kinder, gentler form of communism advanced by Antonio Gramsci, where you secularize the culture to complete godlessness, and you get the same result. And that's what we have, a nation of practical atheism in which our Lord Jesus Christ has no influence in the role of government, social institutions, and the public lives of men, and a time when Catholic leadership and Catholic people have effectively abandoned the true faith and the fight for the faith and has settled for a peaceful coexistence with militant godlessness. Now, I want to close by saying I don't say all this in order to promote fear or to promote depression or anything like that. No, we have to remember that divine providence knew from all eternity that each one of us would live at this time in these circumstances and face these challenges. So the answer to all this, of course, is for us, first of all, to learn our Catholic faith better, to live as a Catholic 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to make use of the sacraments and the Mass, to raise our children in the faith, to withdraw ourselves as much as we can to the popular culture. Just don't let the television and the pop culture overwhelm us. And to substitute this popular culture with good activities, and to oppose these manifold evils in any legitimate way we can in the natural order. And we also need to educate ourselves on the state of the nation and the world from the realistic viewpoint of natural law and divine law. We're especially called upon to obey Our Lady of Fatima in our lives, pray the rosary every day, make sacrifices for sinners, make the 5 first Saturdays of reparation, and pray a great deal for the Holy Father. And we also pray and work in line with this, and we petition the Pope for the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, to bring about the conversion of Russia, the defeat of the errors of Russia, a period of peace granted to the world, and to bring about what Our Lady promised, the triumph of the Immaculate Heart, for we know in the end she will reign in spite of her enemies. Thank you for your attention.
La Madonna di Fatima ha detto: «Se le mie richieste non verranno esaudite, la Russia diffonderà i suoi orrori in tutto il mondo, provocando guerre e persecuzioni contro la Chiesa. I buoni saranno martirizzati. Il Santo Padre dovrà soffrire molto. Varie nazioni saranno annientate».
La Beata Vergine ci ha fornito un modo per ottenere la pace nel mondo, perché solo lei può aiutarci. In troppi, tuttavia, non si rendono conto della portata di queste parole. Forse ritengono che non sia accaduto niente di veramente drammatico e che non bisogna preoccuparsene troppo. Questo è dovuto al fatto che i giornalisti, i commentatori, i cosiddetti opinion leader della stampa e della televisione, in altre parole coloro che avrebbero il dovere di informarci, in realtà sono solo al soldo del nemico e comunque non fanno proprio il loro lavoro. E non ci dicono che dal momento in cui abbiamo rifiutato il messaggio di Fatima, perché l'umanità questo ha fatto, ha disprezzato e rifiutato Fatima, vi sono stati 1.680.000.000 di morti violente. Ripeto, 1 miliardo, cioè 1 seguito da 9 zeri, più altri 686 milioni di persone che sono morte a causa del fatto che abbiamo ignorato la Madonna di Fatima. Spero che questa cifra vi permetta di comprendere la portata spaventosa della decisione di ignorare la Madonna di Fatima. Sono 95 anni che l'umanità si permette di ignorarla e abbiamo già pagato un prezzo tremendo. Ma questo potrebbe raddoppiarsi, addirittura triplicarsi negli anni a venire se continueremo impunemente ad ignorarla. Solo pochi mesi fa l'umanità ha raggiunto l'incredibile numero di 7 miliardi di abitanti. Le Sacre Scritture ci dicono che a un certo punto, tra l'1 e i 2/3 della popolazione mondiale verranno spazzati via da una guerra mondiale. Francamente, se questo non ci desta dal nostro torpore, non so cosa potrebbe riuscirci. Forse qualche giornalista che ne parli in diretta sulla CNN? Oppure un articolo del New York Times? Non lo so, ma quel che so per certo è che non abbiamo preso Fatima abbastanza sul serio. Le nostre responsabilità e i nostri doveri quotidiani ci portano via gran parte della giornata e tra studio, lavoro e famiglia le nostre 24 ore spesso volano via e non ci resta molto altro da fare. È ovvio che il Papa e i Vescovi abbiano una vita assolutamente densa di incontri e cose da fare, per carità, ma questo non può essere una scusa né per loro né tantomeno per noi, poiché tutti noi dovremo mettere Fatima al primo posto tra le nostre priorità. Non esiste al mondo nulla di più serio, di più importante, di più urgente del messaggio della Madonna di Fatima. Alcuni anni fa ricevetti una lettera da parte di un vescovo piuttosto anziano, se non erro della diocesi di Ottawa in Canada. In quella sua lettera il vescovo in sostanza mi diceva una cosa del tipo: «Padre Gruner, se lei non alzasse così tanto la voce e non ci urlasse contro, forse cominceremo a prestare attenzione a cosa dice». Ecco cosa risposi a quel vescovo: «Eccellenza, la ringrazio moltissimo per il suo interesse e i suoi consigli e le sue preoccupazioni. Ora però, se potesse cortesemente spiegarmi come posso migliorare nel mio lavoro e attirare l'attenzione dei vescovi senza alzare troppo la voce, ne sarei veramente grato. Io odio alzare la voce e odio attirare l'attenzione su me stesso, ma non sembrano esservi alternative per diffondere questo messaggio». Vedete, i numeri non mentono. Ieri abbiamo partecipato alla Marcia per la Vita qui a Roma e questo perché non possiamo tacere dinanzi alla spaventosa piaga dell'aborto. Sin dal 1975 le statistiche parlano di oltre 1.300.000 aborti. E con le guerre si aggiungono altri 78 milioni di morti, per non parlare degli assassini di Stato, non solo in Russia ma anche in Cina, per arrivare agli oltre 230 milioni di morti. Si tratta di una cifra catastrofica che ci induce a ritenere, come fece Papa San Pio X, che si stiano avvicinando i giorni che precedono la venuta dell'Anticristo. L'enormità di queste cifre è secondo solo all'incredibile miopia di chi non vuol vedere queste cose, che stanno accadendo adesso intorno a noi. Fu proprio il cardinale Ratzinger a dire che il messaggio di Fatima si può trovare nelle scritture e che stiamo vivendo il periodo predetto dall'Apocalisse. Anche se è comprensibile distrarsi a causa delle informazioni fuorvianti che ci vengono date dalla stampa e dalla televisione, questi eccidi continuano a accadere ogni giorno. E la loro portata è tale che ormai è innegabile che se non proprio nei giorni dell'Apocalisse o nei giorni che precedono la venuta dell'Anticristo, stiamo sicuramente vivendo in un'epoca che non ha precedenti nella storia dell'umanità. Pensiamo alla Chiesa Cattolica. L'unico altro momento della sua storia che possa paragonarsi alla crisi attuale risale all'epoca dell'eresia ariana, quando il 90% dei vescovi di allora cadde preda di quell'eresia. Erano rimasti solo 3-4 vescovi a combattere gli eretici e il più grande tra loro, Sant'Attanasio, fu addirittura scomunicato dal Papa nel 357. Ovviamente la sua era una scomunica solo teorica, perché come ci ha spiegato San Tommaso e come la Chiesa ha sempre insegnato, la legge non è fatta da ciò che dice il legislatore, ma essa è l'ordinato della ragione ed è per il bene comune. La legge della Chiesa afferma che nessuno può essere punito se non ha commesso un errore o un crimine. Quindi, poiché Attanasio rimase fedele alla vera fede cattolica, difendendola a oltranza, come era suo dovere in quanto fedele vescovo, non avrebbe dovuto essere punito. E non era colpevole malgrado il Papa di allora avesse emesso sentenza di scomunica. Successivamente, infatti, Papa Liberio si pentì del suo gesto, ma egli fu il primo Papa a non essere canonizzato sin dai tempi di San Pietro. È bene tenere a mente che non dobbiamo avere timore del giudizio dell'uomo, se siamo dalla parte di Dio. È un principio che non dobbiamo mai dimenticare, così come il fatto che la profezia nella Chiesa ha una funzione ben precisa, una funzione che non avrà mai fine e che va rispettata, così come vanno rispettati gli uffici apostolici. Come ci insegna San Paolo nella lettera agli Efesini, infatti, la Chiesa è costruita sulla base degli apostoli, ma anche dei profeti, quindi non soltanto sui primi, e pertanto il ruolo della profezia è fondamentale. Le scritture ci dicono che dobbiamo estinguere lo spirito e non dobbiamo disprezzare le profezie, ma che dobbiamo esaminare ogni cosa e ritenere il bene, astenendoci da ogni specie di male. Ecco perché sono decenni che promuovo il messaggio di Fatima, non solo perché esso è l'unico tra tutti i messaggi mariani, ma anche perché è stato approvato dalla Chiesa. Durante un suo discorso qui a Roma diversi anni fa, padre Joseph St. Marie, e cioè colui che scrisse il discorso pronunciato da Giovanni Paolo II a Fatima nel 1982, disse giustamente che il ruolo della gerarchia è quello di giudicare ed esaminare se un profeta affermi o meno la verità. Ma una volta che la gerarchia ha riconosciuto che quel messaggio proviene da Dio, allora il Papa e i vescovi sono obbligati a seguirlo, non per obbedienza al profeta, bensì a Dio che usa quel profeta per comunicare con loro. Questo dovere è intrinsecamente legato al loro ruolo di pastori nella Chiesa. Non sono certo io a dire al Papa quel che deve fare, è la Madonna di Fatima a farlo. Io mi limito a spiegare cosa significano le parole della Madonna, a rispondere alle obiezioni dei teologi o di altri che non hanno avuto il tempo di rifletterci abbastanza. Ma torniamo a quel 1917, quando la Madonna dette all'umanità un messaggio per ottenere la pace. Le era stato chiesto di aiutarci e così fece, dandoci un rimedio per ottenere la pace nel mondo, che però abbiamo ostinatamente rifiutato nei successivi 95 anni. Nel 1931, durante l'apparizione di Riangio, Nostro Signore fornì a Sor Lucia, o meglio al Papa e ai Vescovi per mezzo della religiosa, una vera e propria lezione di storia. Disse infatti: «Fa sapere ai miei ministri, dato che continuano a seguire l'esempio del re di Francia nel ritardare l'esecuzione del mio ordine, che come il re di Francia anche loro lo seguiranno nella sciagura». Di che esempio stava parlando? In questa apparizione Nostro Signore fece riferimento ai re di Francia. Il 17 giugno 1689, per mezzo di Santa Margherita Maria, Dio aveva ordinato al re di Francia di consacrare il suo paese al Sacro Cuore di Gesù. Sin da allora i tre re che si succedettero al trono della Francia ignorarono la profezia di Santa Margherita Maria e l'ordine che attraverso di lei aveva ricevuto dal Signore. Persino mentre era ancora in vita Margherita Maria Aloque venne riconosciuta come una santa. I suoi contemporanei erano a conoscenza della sua santità, quindi i re di Francia, per aver ignorato la sua profezia, pagarono con la loro vita. Il 17 giugno 1789, infatti, esattamente 100 anni dopo la richiesta di Nostro Signore, il re di Francia venne privato della sua autorità da parte del Terzo Stato. 3 settimane più tardi, con la presa della Bastiglia, avrebbe avuto inizio la Rivoluzione francese del 21 gennaio 1793. Re Luigi XVI sarebbe stato ghigliottinato dai rivoluzionari. Nostro Signore ha fatto un legame assolutamente incontrovertibile. Fa sapere ai miei ministri, dato che seguono l'esempio del re di Francia nel ritardare l'esecuzione del mio ordine, che come il re di Francia anche loro lo seguiranno nella sciagura. Fino ad oggi i papi e i vescovi hanno ignorato o comunque ritardano l'esecuzione di quell'ordine divino, accampando una scusa dopo l'altra. Penso ormai di averle sentite tutte nella mia carriera, ma come abbiamo già abbondantemente dimostrato con le nostre conferenze e le nostre pubblicazioni, quelle scuse fanno acqua da tutte le parti. Non c'è alcun motivo che impedisca la consacrazione della Russia, ma purtroppo fino ad ora hanno scelto di non farla. Ci troviamo davanti a un bivio. Nessuno può ordinare al Santo Padre di fare alcunché, tantomeno il sottoscritto. Solo il Papa ha infatti l'autorità di ordinare alla Chiesa di compiere un atto simile. Questo non vuol dire, tuttavia, che i fedeli non abbiano delle carte da giocare, ma di questo in particolare parleremo in un altro discorso. Ad ogni modo, il messaggio di Fatima non riguarda solo il Papa. Come ha detto proprio Benedetto XVI mentre si recava a Fatima, nel terzo segreto si predice la passione della Chiesa e una persecuzione del Santo Padre. Ma il Papa fa parte della Chiesa, quindi non è solo lui a soffrirne le conseguenze, ma tutta la Chiesa cattolica.